I'm here today to inspire you with what you can do with your data. Some of you in the room are data owners, some of you are data users, but there's something in this program for all of you. I'm going to show you why we have transformed how we work at the GLA.
And I'm going to show you how we did it.
But first, I want to tell you a bit about our data ecosystem. Over the last 5 years in the GLA, for the purposes of built environment data, we've created a strong data ecosystem based on both planning data coming through planning applications and the wider planning system, but also static data coming from policies. What this has meant is that we have a really strong basis of open data in London, and you can use most of the data out of these platforms yourself freely on APIs. But for us, it's meant that we've been able to develop a series of products that help us plan for the future of London. It also enables us to engage the communities better in the planning system. Now, I do have to flag, in the middle of all of this, we have a number of programs being led by DLUC on digital planning that aim to mirror a lot of this work. But you don't need to wait for those programs to deliver. You can do it yourself now. So, what was the real challenge? What problem were you trying to solve? Well, our key challenge is delivering homes for Londoners. I'm sure you read the press as much as I do. You see much of the debate played out in the political environment. But just pretend for a moment that you're a house builder. You want to build a home somewhere in London. Before we delivered the planning data map, you would have needed to have gone and explored 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 local plan policy maps, most of which had static data in PDF documents. You would have had to manually review them. You would have then had to review the London plan, if you could find all of those documents on relevant websites, before reaching conclusions about what the spatial constraints on sites were. What this really actually meant was that a lot of development wasn't coming forwards because the development community couldn't access the data very quickly and cheaply. So unless there was some real obvious returns on sites, it was essentially parked. Or at least that's the theory. So instead, at the end of last year, we released the single planning data map for London. It's a huge amount of data. You can access all of the local plan data from all of the 35 local planning authorities in London in one place. Well, it does lead to the question, so what? What impact has this really had? Well, the impact has been tremendous. So far this year, so up to the 1st of this month, the data has been pulled out of the data map this many times. Over 8 million times so far. If that's not a really clear use case for doing it, I don't know what is. So Paul, how did we do it?
Thanks, Peter. So a lot of those 8 million calls were, of course, people downloading data directly, but a lot of them are people visiting our map. So I'd like to start off with a demonstration of the web map itself. Now, I'm sure some of you have come across maps where people have brought together perhaps 50, possibly 100 layers and just stuck them on a map and kind of left you to get on with it. And there are real limitations to that because it's quite easy to miss something that's important to you. It's often difficult to combine things if they've already been kind of pre-colored. So we built on the experience of some of our previous maps. We spent a lot of time talking to our users, spent a lot of time talking to the planning team to build something bespoke for this. So Peter was talking about an imaginary developer wanting to use this data. So I'll just talk you through the different stages. And you can imagine the first stage is probably a London-wide site sift. So you have a couple of factors you're interested in, and you want to know where do they kind of happen together, or where you want to avoid them, perhaps. So I've got a demonstration here. And one of the things we've done is we've organized into 4 different groups. So here you have planning constraints. Next to it, you have opportunities. After that, you've got information from the boroughs, and then you have some non-planning information. So I'm going to turn on building conservation areas, because pretty much all of the boroughs have those. And you can see some description, and some of these have links off to kind of further information about them. I'm also going to turn on industrial site, because sometimes ex-industrial site provides good opportunities for development. Now, here we've got major areas of major infrastructure investment, so I might want to focus in on that, but they're quite large strategic areas, so within those, I want to focus on sites that have been already allocated for housing. So you can see how you can kind of choose and bring together things that are of interest to you or important to you. Now, what's really nice about this is it also brings in non-planning information. So here we've got significant investment by our culture team into kind of culture infrastructure. We also have investment areas for improving air quality. So you've got environmental information as well as the kind of planning information. Now, having done that, I've decided on a borough I'm interested in, so I can just open up that group and then take a look at a particular borough. So I could just click through these, turn them on and off, and kind of explore them. But actually, by now, I've got a site in mind, so I'm going to zoom the map into one particular site. And I don't want to just see the site, I want to see the area immediately around it, so I know the context. So I'm going to go off and do a radius search, and we have 1,000 layers, so it's going to take a moment to just run. But here I am, I'm drawing my chosen area, and then it goes off and searches. Now, the area is in the borough of Camden, but actually it's picked up information from Brent, which is the neighbouring borough, and it's picked up some of the pan-London layers as well. So I'm just going to turn on 2 or 3 layers just as an example. So I've got one of the pan-London layers, I've got a slightly more strategic layer from Camden, and then I've got a site-specific layer as well. So you can kind of choose your layers of interest, and then once you've done that, you can just kind of close the box and go back to the map. Okay, so none of these planning policies apply to my site, but there is one right next to it. Zooming out a bit, I can actually see there's 2 or 3 others nearby. So if I want to know what they're called or find out a bit more about them, you can kind of hover over them, and it tells you a bit about them. You can also see at this point that you've got a large strategic site and then kind of smaller kind of parcels of land within that. So at the moment, they're all the same color, and you can't tell them apart that easily. Now, one of the things we were keen to do was not to recreate a whole GIS online, but we did want to give people a few tools so that they can export a map that was actually clear and that they could use in reports or in presentations. So here you can choose from a range of color-safe colors, and you can color up your different layers that you've chosen to put on, choose how transparent they are, and then you can export something that's kind of useful in its own right. Now, the final thing I want to show you are these kind of large yellow or kind of orangey areas up there, and they are actually protected views of St. Paul's from Greenwich Park. So we're talking about planning policies that are occurring 5 or 6 boroughs away, but they potentially have an effect near our site of interest. Now, that's an extreme example, but the point I wanted to make is one of the real risks with doing your research is that you don't know what you don't know. If you're just focusing on your own kind of borough, then there may be other things happening nearby that you need to take into account. And I think that's the real strength of this, is that it brings all these different bits of information together into one place. So, to be honest, I could spend all afternoon playing with these maps and kind of showing you stuff, but what I'd like to do is just move on to what the systems and the technology that went on behind it. So the very first step was to bring the data together, and to be honest, this is very much a kind of traditional desktop GIS activity, and there were technology challenges. So if any of you have ever tried bringing together polygon layers that have been created in different types of software, although there are industry standards, actually some types of polygons are allowed in some software and not others. So there was a lot of work of kind of getting stuff in a standard format. And of course, all the layers from the boroughs had information behind them, so they had attribute tables. And for each layer from each borough, they would have different attributes. And then you multiply that by 35 times, you have lots of different types of information. And actually, you perhaps noticed when I clicked on the map earlier, the information that came up was quite limited. So what we did was we chose, I guess, kind of the core information that was common across all of the layers. And the idea is that over time, we'll build up on that and we'll enhance it and enrich it. But rather than spending years and years trying to get an agreement on what everyone using exactly the same attributes, we just went with what was there and have kind of put it out. And I should say that rather than going to all of the boroughs and asking for all of the data up front, we approached this kind of in a kind of a step-by-step way. So the first piece of work was pretty much all boroughs have building conservation areas. So that was the layer I turned on earlier. And we worked our way around all of the boroughs asking for just that bit of information, brought it together, cleaned it up, shared it publicly as a kind of pilot, and then kind of gradually built out from that borough by borough. And I think, you know, although there were technology challenges, I think with this sort of work, if you've ever been involved with it, you'll know a lot of them are kind of organizational and people challenges, and that working with our kind of partners and kind of building up their trust and helping them understand the process, I think, made a real difference. And I should also, at this point, I think Louise might be in the audience, so she's the person who did a lot of this work, so I need to kind of thank her while I'm up here. Okay, as I go through this chart, you'll see that there's these kind of core areas in pink highlighted in the middle. Those are our kind of core Esri stack through our enterprise agreement. And one of the things we really value about working with Esri is that although they're bespoke products, they can interact with other tools. So there's various points where they need to interact with other data systems that we have. And that's something that's really important to us and something we've really made use of here. So the first thing we did was organize the data, having brought it together. And really, there were two outputs from that. So one was our pan-London layers, like those industrial areas and so on, where lots of boroughs all have the same local designation. We also created a set of layers for each borough as well, which were the layers I kind of showed you on the right. And we loaded up the pan-London ones into our corporate GIS, which I guess is the closest we have to a single source of truth for all our kind of key layers. Now, to be honest, if we did nothing else at this point, it still would have been a useful project because we've shared it publicly, we've put those files up on the data store so that other organizations can download the files, use them in their own systems. And also, they've benefited other projects at the GLA as well. So we're doing a big piece of work trying to model the buildings across London and looking at their energy performance. And so my colleagues in the data science team have been using Python and bringing the data that we collected and cleaned through this just straight into their models without having to wait years and years, and it being a whole project in its own right to acquire that data. So it's already had benefits, even if we did nothing else. Now, although we could have stopped at this point, one of the things we were aware of was it's quite an intimidating data set. I mean, 1,000 layers, each with lots of information, is quite a lot to wrap your head around. So what we wanted to do was to create an interactive data explorer that allowed people to take a look at the data fairly simply and quickly, decide what was important to them, and then just download what they needed. So to do this, we used ArcGIS Enterprise, created API endpoints, so created web map services. And you'll notice that's split into two parts. So the pan-London and the nationally designated layers are all hosted on our in-house servers, but all of the borough layers we actually put on ArcGIS Online, and they're large data sets, they're publicly available. We thought they'd probably have quite a lot of visits, and ArcGIS Online is the perfect place for that because that's what it was created for. And then we brought them both back together into a web application, which is what I demonstrated earlier. Now, that was built in Leaflet, using Vue as the framework. We've been doing quite a lot of work recently to try and improve the interaction between interactive data visualizations and charts and tables so that you can kind of interact with the charts and then the map works with you, interact with the map, and then you can see it in a chart. And we've been using Svelte for that, so if anyone's interested in talking to me about that, I'll be around afterwards. Right. The next thing I should say is some of you in the audience are probably thinking, oh, typical London, you probably had a massive team working on this. One of the things I want to point out is there are only really 3 people doing most of the work on this. So there's a GIS officer in Peter's team, there was my GIS manager in my team who did a lot of the publishing and a lot of the I guess, kind of organizing of the data and checking of it, and then my data visualization developer who built the front-end tool. So the point I want to make is you don't need a huge army of staff to do this type of work. You can do it with a relatively kind of small team of, I guess, skilled individuals. The next thing I wanted to say was about kind of monitoring, and certainly when I did my GIS training 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of talking about kind of user journeys and user-centered design, but that's something that's really important to us. So the iteration you saw there, I think, was about the 5th or 6th release of the map, and been lots of small releases in between. So we're constantly listening to our users, constantly tweaking, adding features, and improving stuff and clarifying things. So we've been monitoring the number of calls on the server, but also the number of visits to the website and which bits of the website people are using. So Peter gave you the headline figure, and I'll just show you now how we got to that. So these are number of calls to our server each day over the last few months. And we launched it just before Christmas. We were very excited. There's a bit of buzz going around it, and it went very quiet over Christmas. And actually, when we look at the server stats, they've got a very human dimension to them. So they get really busy about 11 o'clock in the morning, then they get quiet, and it's really busy about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It's quite often quiet at the weekends. It's quiet on a Fridays sometimes. So we're reasonably confident that these are being used by humans, and it's not the bots kind of hitting them 24 hours a day and just bumping up the numbers artificially. The other thing you'll notice is that peak in January, and it took us quite a while to figure out what's going on, and we tracked it down to one of Peter's LinkedIn posts. So, people always say it's not enough to do stuff, you need to tell people about it, and he did, and you can see the impact there. Now, the data's quite noisy, it's up and down on a day-by-day basis, but a couple of weeks ago, we managed to achieve 200,000 calls a day, which I think is quite impressive for just one of our kind of outputs. So I'm just going to hand back to Peter to talk about the impact of that.
Thank you. So it's for me to talk about the so what. So from our perspective, unlocking this data service has had some real dramatic change in the space for London. Back in 2019, when we started this conversation, we saw many businesses in this space just scraping and collecting together data sets, packaging them up and selling them. Now, these are people who are far cleverer than me. I have no skill or knowledge in this space. But for London's sake, what we've moved to now is a space where a lot of those sectors are now producing analytics around the data. So rather than deriving their value from packaging up public sector data and reselling it, they're making the innovation happen. That's really powerful for me because that means that this sort of intervention has direct impact. PropTech can innovate. The cost of entry to the market for anybody who wants to work in this space is brought right down with the world of open data. Decision makers get new insight based on facts. The end result? Well, hopefully, once we're past this economic blip, we can get building. The other use case that I'm really driven by is understanding what land is available for development in London and what London's going to look like over the next decade. And this is what the Land for London programme is really about, and you're very welcome to Google it to find out a lot more. But in practice, it's pulling together some of these really powerful data sets together with sites that the development community know are coming forwards to enable us to have a shared data set that we can then scenario model based on what our future infrastructure needs are, what our future community needs are, and really start to use data to drive the future of the planning system. So there's 2 points I want to land to close the deal with you guys. And the fact you're here probably means you're already part of the conversation. But for those of you who are data holders, I would say you've got 3 choices. You can choose to lock your data away and keep it to yourself. You won't get any of that real transformation we're talking about if you do that. You can just do that first step that Paul described, which is unlock your data and make it available. You don't have to have the sexy data visualization platforms. Leave that to other people if it's not your bag. But if you want to be really part of the story, that's where you can invest your time and energy. You can be part of shaping the future. As a data owner and curator, you can shape the AI conversation as well as many others. I'd argue as data holders, we're shaping the future of London. And then, to the other half of the room, sorry if it's got the back to front, oh well. First of all, you'd have seen my subliminal message on the first slide, which is, please go and use our data. it's a shared data set. It belongs to everybody in London. Please use it. And secondly, more importantly, as the curators of a data set, please tell us what you're doing with it. Now, I don't hear many people that produce open data really hammer this point home, so I'm going to do it. I have to justify every penny I spend. I invest a lot of time and money in open data. Unless I have really clear use cases and evidence for how it's changing the conversation, I don't get to access more money, more data. So if you're one of those innovators out there doing stuff with all this data, come and tell me what you're doing. I'm really pleased if you make £1 million out of it. That's not my problem. My problem is to get more funding to do some more work. So I think that's it. So thank you ever so much. Take care.
Thank you.